Happening right now, President Donald Trump is on his way back to Washington after a multi-stop trip in Asia. He ended his visit with this. It's that highly anticipated handshake and then a sit-down face-to-face meeting with China's President Xi Jinping. So President Trump says the meeting was great and that many agreements were made. So let's drill down and get very specific here. Here's what we know so far. The president says the overall tariff on imports of Chinese goods will go down 57% to 47%. That decision came after President Xi promised to stop the flow of chemicals that make fentanyl in the United States. Now, Trump also signaled that the two leaders settled issues over China's rare earth mineral exports. He also says the two discussed computer chips and China's purchase of U.S. soybeans. After the 2-hour meeting, CBS News Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes pressed the president on those details and when these agreements would actually be in writing.
What are the major stumbling blocks that are left now to work through, and how soon do you think you could sign a trade deal with China?
Well, I think pretty soon. We have not too many major stumbling blocks. We have a deal. Now, every year we'll renegotiate the deal, but I think the deal will go on for a long time, long beyond the year. We'll negotiate at the end of a year.
Negotiate at the end of the year. Let's go live to Washington and CBS News political reporter Zach Hudak. Zach, good to have you. So what progress was actually inked here, if anything?
Reed, I think the biggest pieces of progress here are just overall that talks have resumed and that there is being slight lowering of the tensions between the U.S. and China on trade here. But I think the most important pieces of what's been negotiated are what you mentioned, the deal that we will allow the sale of U.S. computer chips to China, while China will also be sending in precious minerals, earth minerals. That's particularly interesting because the minerals are needed to build the chips, and we build the best chips. So that's really a symbiotic relationship that we've resumed with China. And then I think additionally, the big takeaway is that President Xi has told President Trump and seemingly convinced him that China is going to really act to stop the flow of fentanyl, which, as we've seen repeatedly, has been the main aim of President Trump's tariffs on China, to try to bring down the flow of fentanyl. So I think that's a sign that we could have a continuation of these decreased tensions and eventually go back to a more standard trade relationship with China.
And that was just a couple of the issues that we were watching out for, but also we know millions of users of TikTok will want to know about this. There's been that drumbeat on the Chinese company ByteDance and a U.S. TikTok takeover. That's been in the headlines, but was there any development on that?
Reed, there are certainly a lot of young folks here in the U.S. who are eager to hear any development on that, but there really was not today. It sounded very promising. Last weekend, we heard from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent that a deal had actually been made between him and Chinese negotiators in Malaysia. But just today in an interview, he seemed to curb that. Here's what he said.
Will China resolve any issues related to TikTok operating in the United States?
Maria, in Kuala Lumpur, we finalized the TikTok agreement in terms of getting Chinese approval, and I would expect that that would go forward in the coming weeks and months, and we'll finally see a resolution to that.
So, Reed, as you heard there, he continues to say that a deal has been made, but now there is a bit of a lengthier timeline before anything goes into effect. But that is something that I know a lot of people were watching out of this meeting, and that, frankly, we got zero mention of in the statements that the Chinese government or the administration put out. So I think we can assume that there was no major progress made in this leaders' meeting today on the matter of TikTok.
All right, Zach Hudak, thank you so much for that. Zach Hudak, sorry about that. Let's look at the economic impact of all of this. Let's bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady. So Kelly, it seems like progress was made with China on trade. What are the economic benefits here in the United States, maybe seen even in the last several hours to the headlines?
So a couple of areas. I mean, one, the fact that the 10%, there will be a 10 percentage point drop in that tariff, that's not nothing. I mean, that's going to impact consumers. That's going to impact businesses, different points in the supply chain, right? Because someone has to pay that, whether it all gets passed on to the consumer or is absorbed by businesses, as we know that much of that is happening right now, and especially small businesses getting hurt by that. And then you think of the counterpart to that, you're avoiding an additional 100% tariff. And that was something that consumers, businesses, the markets were really scared about. So having a good relationship with China, lower tariffs, that's definitely going to help the economy. The other piece that I think is really interesting is the rare earth resources, delaying those exports a year and then renegotiating at that point. I mean, that's critical for all types of companies, whether we are talking artificial intelligence, tech, defense. It is a very important input for many of the products that we use as consumers. So having companies have access to that instead of having to get an export license to get those out of China is very critical. And then overall, you think about how we saw the stock market react to that 100% tariff. Having a more stable relationship with China, having a very clear, defined deal if this does go forward, is critical. So much of the back and forth when it comes to the market, to businesses having to decide whether to order, to not order, when to order, has been because of these trade relationships that are changing, but specifically China. Now, talk to a lot of folks, Reed, they say, okay, let's wait for the ink to be on the paper because we've been here before and we've seen things fall apart, but definitely some optimism if this goes forward.
We'll take optimism where we can get it. So also got to ask you about this because a lot of people are feeling up and bright about it. The Federal Reserve chose to reduce interest rates by what, 1/4 percentage point? That means rates are now at their lowest in nearly 3 years. What stood out to you in Chairman Jerome Powell's speech?
That the Fed is really prioritizing the labor market, that they're concerned about the layoffs that they've seen recently, anecdotally, with companies laying off folks, with people taking longer to find jobs if they are out of work. And so Powell said it's not that inflation isn't a risk. It's not that prices aren't rising, but then when you're weighing these two, they are continuing to prioritize that. The other thing is this question of December. We have another Fed meeting before the end of the year. We were expecting an interest rate cut. Powell very much said, do not expect that. It's really up in the air. One, because of rising prices, but two, because of the lack of government data. The jobs report, the traditional inflation reports, those have been delayed. The data has been delayed in being collected because of the government shutdown. So in December, we may just have a wait and see moment again. Markets did not like that read yesterday. I was at the New York Stock Exchange and immediately he said that and the market started selling off.
There was the reaction. Kelly O'Grady, it's always great to talk to you. You have a good day, friend.